The kitchen of a medieval monastery was never quiet. Pots hissed above the hearth, iron lids clicked against stone, and the air smelt of butter, smoke, and saffron. On a wooden table lay a row of eggs, hard-boiled and pale. A monk cut each in half with a silver knife, the yolks crumbling like yellow dust beneath his fingers. He ground them in a mortar with sage and a leaf called costmary, sharp, sweet, almost mint. Then he mixed in a raw egg, pepper, and the golden water of saffron. The paste turned bright as sunrise. Outside, the bells rang for vespers. Inside, he filled each shell again, leveled the tops, and set them face down in a pan of bubbling butter. When he lifted them moments later, the edges were crisp, the scent of spice and honey rising like incense. No one then called them deviled eggs. That word had not yet been born. But something about them, the color, the heat, the bite of pepper, felt daring, almost sinful. Centuries later, that same sensation of warmth turning to fire on the tongue would give the humble egg a new name. One whispered with a smile at banquet tables across Europe, the deviled egg. This is where that name began, not in America, not in modern kitchens, but here, in 15th century Germany, where spice met faith, and an ordinary egg learned to taste a little like temptation. Long before those monks browned their eggs in butter, Rome had already written the first chapter. In the 1st century A.D., the gourmet Apicius described boiled eggs served with honey, pepper, wine, and garum, a fermented fish sauce so strong it could flavor an entire meal with a drop. For Roman diners, eggs marked the beginning of every feast. They called the meal ab ovo asce ad mala, from eggs to apples. To start with the egg was to announce abundance. But when the empire fell, its flavors scattered. Centuries later, on the Iberian Peninsula under Islamic rule, cooks revived the idea. An anonymous 13th century Andalusian book gave instructions for stuffing eggs. Slice them clean with a thread. Mix the yolks with cilantro, onion juice, pepper, and a barley-based sauce called murree. The halves were pressed together again, held by a tiny stick. A simple meal, but it carried the elegance of chemistry, acid, fat, spice, and scent. As trade routes opened, that recipe traveled north with merchants and monks. By the time it reached the cool stone kitchens of Central Europe, the egg was no longer a symbol of beginnings. It had become a vessel, a shell for imagination. Each culture added its hand. Italians filled theirs with cheese and raisins, the Germans with herbs and saffron. And somewhere in those bright yellow yolks, the future name of deviled was waiting to hatch. In the 1400s, spice was a luxury that could cost a month's wages. To cook with pepper, saffron, or clove was to flirt with wealth and sin. Church leaders warned against foods that inflamed the senses. Yet in kitchens across Germany and northern Italy, cooks defied that caution with quiet creativity. The German recipe for stuffed eggs described it plainly. Boil them hard, halve them, grind the yolks with raw egg, sage, costmary, pepper, and saffron. Fill the whites, bake them well in butter. Serve with the sauce of vinegar, honey, and saffron. Sweet and sharp, golden and bitter, a balance that seemed almost alchemical. That balance was dangerous, too. Costmary, the Bible leaf, was known to sharpen the mind and warm the blood. Too much pepper was said to excite the humors. To combine them under monastic roofs was daring. But cooks did it anyway, calling the dish a humble gift for feast days. Their risk created something new, a flavor that was not gentle, not safe, but alive. When diners tasted it, they joked that it had the devil's heat. No one wrote the word deviled yet. That would come centuries later, but the idea was born, that food could carry mischief in its spice. Every era invents its little rebellions. For medieval cooks, this one came disguised as supper. By the 17th century, the egg had left the monastery. In Italian manners, the same recipe appeared again, this time richer. Cheese was added, aged parmesan and fresh ricotta, along with raisins and mint. The eggs were rejoined and fried in butter, then served with a sauce of verjuice and spice. Color entered the plate, literally. Cooks began to dye crumbled egg whites pink, using a New World import, cochineal, a powdered insect from the prickly pear cactus. It turned the meal into art and into profit. A pinch of red could raise the value of a dish tenfold. But with color and wealth came vanity. What had once been a monk's meal became a courtly indulgence, and soon the joke about the devil's heat turned literal. In the 18th century, English writers began describing heavily spiced dishes as deviled, food hot as the devil himself. At first, the term applied to meats and sauces. By the 19th century, it reached the egg. Across the Atlantic, newspapers printed recipes for deviled eggs. They called for mustard, cayenne, vinegar, the same heat and acid that once made monks nervous. The yolk, reborn again, became a taste of comfort and a memory of danger long forgotten. The word deviled had traveled from jest to definition. 1,000 years after Apicius, the world finally had a name for the warmth that had been waiting inside the egg all along. By the early 1900s, the deviled egg had crossed yet another border, from Europe's salons to America's kitchens. Recipes dropped vinegar and butter for a new invention, mayonnaise, and replaced cayenne with paprika, softening its bite. It became the dish of picnics and Sunday gatherings. During Prohibition, it shared tables with bathtub gin. And in 1933, at a White House luncheon, First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt served her own version, a Depression-era lesson in frugality. Egg yolks mashed with onion and vinegar, topped with thin tomato sauce. The press called it humble, but for millions of Americans, that humility was comfort. It was a meal that asked for little and gave much. Across oceans and centuries, the egg had shed its costly saffron and gold hues, but kept its heart, the idea that something simple could still feel forbidden. From Rome to Germany, from palace to farm, the flavor of deviled had shifted from sin to tradition, and in that shift it quietly preserved its oldest meaning, pleasure tempered by restraint. Some say the word deviled was born of heat. Others think it was born of humor, but perhaps it was born of memory, of the moment when spice met silence in a monk's kitchen, and the air smelled of butter and saffron. Today, no one calls it sinful to eat one. Yet when we taste that soft yolk and feel the gentle sting of pepper, we still taste a trace of the old dare, a whisper of the monks who browned their eggs in butter and laughed at their own courage. An egg once seasoned for the devil has become a comfort for the soul, And in that comfort lies its miracle, that even sin, when shared in moderation, can taste like grace.